So let's talk about our stories. So you wrote one about Paul Boyne's case, and I wanted to start here. I went back and forth with Professor Eugene Volokh, who many consider the foremost expert on the First Amendment. However, after my communications with him on this case, I am not so sure. However, before we get to the meat of the story, Professor Volokh looked at the arrest warrant and gave, I won't say an exhaustive list of the problematic, if you will, blog posts. And so let's read them. These are the things that are putting Paul in jail, according to Professor Volokh. Quote, in the cross, referring to Judge Mokashar, in the cross sight of a firearm. The judicial vengeance of Judge Mokashar begs a 50 cal to the head, talks of quote, assassinations, and, quote, 50 caliber ammunition, the item listed in. Is she begging for a 308 shot to the head through two panes of window glass from an oath keeper concealed in the woods behind her home? A quick 50 cal to the head delivered through the back window of her car. And, quote, another judge, worthy of a 50 cal to the head. And, quote, the Molotov cocktail stuff in number 11. Hunt Dysart, I don't know what he means. And, quote, are there enough 50 cals for all the chosen heads in need of redemption? So is he right? This seems threatening. Why shouldn't Paul remain in jail?
Well, look, it's not like these are public figures. That's the biggest thing. The standard is so high to say that this is actually a true threat. If these people are public figures, they have to show that Paul actually took some affirmative steps towards violence here. His speech alone is not good enough. And it's satirical, and it's public speech. It's not directed speech. This is public speech on a public blog. And Michael, it would be a lot closer if he would have sent an email with this stuff directly to the targets, right?
Right.
To the people. That would probably put you in true threat land. He put this out in the public square, right, to talk about this on the internet, our modern day public square.
He's
no different than a maniac on a soapbox in the middle of the old public square, just bitching about everybody. That's what he's doing. He's bitching.
But no, he says, quote, the judicial vengeance of Judge Mokashar, who is this guy right here, bags a 50 cal to the head. Isn't that a true threat?
He's not saying that he's going to do it, right?
Mm-hmm. And he's suggesting it. Isn't suggesting it enough?
That's the point. The point is what becomes suggestive. We're not going to punish true threats. We're going to punish suggestion. You know, that's the standard we're talking about.
So for those who don't know, how would you define a true threat according to the law?
Well, you have to have an intent, right? You have to have an intent. And that's the biggest issue. The Counterman versus Colorado case, which Judge Volokh said is probably the most recent key case, along with Virginia v. Black and U.S. v. Watts, says that you have to have some type of reckless intent or better, or mens rea of recklessness, maliciousness, intent, those type of things when you're making these statements when it relates to public figures. Okay. And so the question here becomes, am I making a true threat against, private person A by saying these things? Maybe I am if they're a private person and I'm just molesting their privacy and I'm saying these things about them. But when you're a public figure, when you have entered the arena, you expect the gladiatorial arena of a public square for these things to be thrown at you.
Does it matter that he says these things in the context of, here is what I found about you doing bad things as far as being a judge. You handed a child to a child molester. You deserve a bullet to the head. Does that matter? That
context is everything in First Amendment analysis. That's the point. Okay. He's a member of the press. He had a blog. He was talking about newsworthy issues. He was acting as a journalist. He was collecting news, disseminating news. Was he using hyperbole and sarcasm and stuff that got to the line? Sure he was, but that shouldn't be punishable without an additional affirmative step. And
he took no. Listen, not only did he not take any further steps, he never emailed any of these articles to any of the judges. He lives in Virginia. All the judges who claim to be victims, including this guy, now retired Judge Muckersher, all acknowledge that not only did he never threaten them beyond these words, that no one came to their house, they didn't face an actual threat, no one drove by with a gun, nothing like that ever happened, and he lives a couple states away.
This way, Muckershower, he actually is now a columnist for Newsweek. He's one of us now, Mike. He's now a journalist, right. And actually he wrote a book which was actually pretty good about the law. And I've written actually decent things about him. I didn't think he was so bad as some of the rest of the judges that we see. But he's the fact is that he was sitting in a position of being a judge. Okay, and so I think you have to see, because now he's going to be in a position with this case. He would have to testify in the if you look at the warrant, his wife was mentioned in the warrant.
All the judges said they were worried about the threat, and they are reasonable people. How come that's not a good argument?
They're worried about the threat, but the question becomes, is it a true threat? Of course, it's a threat, but there's two words there: true threat. So there's threat. Like we saw the person last week under their blanket talking about this one and that one getting, Nancy Nace and everything else. That's not a true threat, because you can't expect somebody sitting under their blanket to be an actual threat. Okay, so the question becomes: is Paul's writing on this blog? He's basically in his parents' basement. He's an internet tough guy. Is that a true threat? It makes it almost pathetic. It almost makes it almost laughable that these judges were afraid of Paul Boyne per se.
And were they afraid?
Were they afraid of his ideas? And
were they afraid of Paul Boyne, or were they saying they were afraid because they wanted him arrested, because they wanted him punished? Because they're
afraid of his ideas, and that goes back to a point I made, Michael, in this story about the fundamental point about the First Amendment that our framers understood is that when words fly, bullets don't. And if you're going to put Paul Boyne in jail potentially for 10 or 15 years for words, then why do we even make words? Why don't we go straight to violence? Why don't we miss that train station and take the express train right to violence? As a society, that there's no society. There's no civil society at that point. There's no ability to have change ideas.
Summarize this article. Summarize this article that you wrote.
Well, I talked about the judicial yentas. We have to get into that, because you and I disagree about who the person was that Judge Grossman got the phone call from in the warrant application. I have the whole warrant printed below. But she said she's sitting at home on a Saturday, and I got a phone call from another judge, and that judge monitors the Paul Boyne blog and told me all about the bad things that Paul Boyne said, and immediately I felt threatened. So it's one of those things that Paul has his blog. And like you said before, the biggest consumers of the Paul Boyne blog are the Connecticut judiciary. They're like yentas calling each other up, gossiping about what these people say. Now, Mike, I think that they do the same thing that they did with Paul Boyne about you and me. We're probably the topic of conversation when they go to lunch.
Now, is it a true threat for me to read what he wrote? Is that if what he wrote is a true threat, then is it a true threat for me to say the judicial vengeance of Judge Muckersher begs a 50 cal to the head? Have I just committed a true threat by reading it?
It goes counterman. It goes to intent. What's your intent in doing this? This is to inform.
Well, my intent is, because I want people who are following this case to have as much detailed information about what the authorities are saying is criminal. So when we're saying it's not, so when I say mean blog posts, it's obviously not generally mean blog posts, but this is what Professor Volokh found. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's certainly at least some of them or most of them. And so things like this.
But Mike, he said this is enough for a jury question. And I think that if a jury sees this, a reasonable jury could see what I said. This appears to be minority report.
I think
this appears to be thought crime.
Especially if they read the entire blog post, which I assume they would have to, because they can't just give them these things. They would start to laugh, because it's actually like the whole idea of putting these things in is to be humorous, and they know it. And that speaks to what you said, that this is a form of satire. And they wanted to get him, because they all were, the judiciary that is, obsessed with his blog because he was writing a lot. He was very accurate. He was naming judges. He was naming a lot of judges. He was naming them in some of their worst, most egregious cases. Go to the circus.com and you'll see. And they wanted to shut him down. This is a political prosecution. And Professor Volokh may be the First Amendment expert. There he is. He teaches at UCLA, among other things. But in my opinion, he is just flat out wrong. And he actually told me that Watts was less threatening because he was threatening the president, who is protected, the most protected person in the world, which is a ridiculous argument. I would say that the president of the United States in the history of the world is the most dangerous job there is. Less than 1 in 12 have been killed in the line of duty. I think it's another 4 who have been shot at but not died. Reagan, Jackson, I think Teddy Roosevelt, and Gerald Ford. And every single one faces some sort of a threat of varying degrees of planning. So the idea that, and in the Watts case, which set up this true threat, the guy said, if I'm forced to go to Vietnam and pick up a rifle, my first shot is at LBJ. And so,
and look what it was, though. It was
come on, you know, LBJ has a secret service, so obviously that's not a true threat. What does that mean?
That sentence started with the word if. If I do this, hypothetically, in Paul Boyne's imagination, because that's where all this is coming from. Paul Boyne's imagination. That's why I'm saying thought crime. That's why I'm saying this is Orwellian. It's telling people that you can't even think about things, and if you deign to think about them, do not put them and commit them to paper. Do not make them part of our discourse of ideas.
And by the way, right here, is she begging for begging for a .308 shot to the head through 2 panes of glass from an oath keeper concealed in the woods behind her house? This is a reference to something that Ted Taupier said about his judge, Elizabeth Bozzuto, in an email, and he still wound up going to jail, even though the email wasn't sent to Judge Bozzuto, and he, in effect, said the same thing. So he was really there doing an homage. The whole thing is completely ridiculous. No one believes that he was intent on following through on any of these threats, and we know he wasn't because he never did.
Let's talk about the other point about Mayentas. Do you think it was Joette Katz that called up Grossman?
I don't know. What I was saying is to jump to her being the one, maybe a little bit.
She said she follows the blog at the ADL seminar.
Well, so do a lot of judges.
Number 2, doesn't that mean that we have to bring Grossman in on a deposition?
Maybe. Well, we should.
Because Joette Katz's name is in this discovery. Call Katz.